As on the order paper, I call the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Secretary Michael Gove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin by thanking the Leader of the Opposition for choosing today's motion and this debate. It provides us all across this House with an opportunity to affirm our commitment to do more in order to deal with the challenge of climate change and to enhance our degraded environment. And I want to also begin by sending a message from my colleague Claire Perry, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Claire, because of unfortunate family circumstances and an illness with a close member of her family, cannot be here today. I'm sure we would all want to send her and her family our very best wishes. And I also have to say that the Prime Minister can't be here for this debate, as she very much wanted to be, because she's appearing before the Liaison Committee. But it is important to acknowledge that across this House and outside it, there are many political figures and political leaders who have played a part in raising awareness of the challenge of climate change and making clear that we must do more. And I'm very happy to associate myself with the remarks made by the Leader of the Opposition in thanking the Right Honourable Member for Doncaster North. He was, as Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, influential in Copenhagen in helping to raise ambitions worldwide, and it was also the case that his Climate Change Act, which was supported across this House, ensured that we as a country had, at the time, the most ambitious approach towards climate change ever. I also want to thank the member for Kingston and Surbiton. We served together in the coalition government. He was again Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change. Well, we didn't always agree on everything. I will want to put on record my admiration for him for the way in which he approached all of these issues in a balanced, mature and reformist fashion. I also want to say, I will in a second, I also want to say that while it's rare in this House that I have good words to say about the Scottish Government overall, I have to say that Rosanna Cunningham, the Scottish Environment Minister, has shown leadership on this issue, and while we may have our differences across this House, I think it's only fair to record that Rosanna's voice has been a strong and powerful one for the environment, as indeed has that of Leslie Griffiths in the Welsh Assembly. The environment belongs to all of us. The cause of climate change is a fight which should unite us. All of us in this House have a common humanity that we need to defend, and I'm very happy to give way.
Grateful for the Right Honourable Gentleman giving way and thank him for his words. But can I tell him from my experience in government of 2.5 years of negotiating on climate change at the European Union, Britain managed to ensure that 27 other countries raise their ambitions to the level of Britain's. So we managed to have leadership of the EU, influence America and China, and influence the climate change treaty in Paris to make it far more ambitious than anyone had expected at the time, because we were at the European Union table able to lead on climate change. Does he realise that by leaving that table, our influence on this critical issue for our world is being dramatically reduced?
I just want to repeat my gratitude to the Right Honourable Gentleman for all the work he did. But there are a number of multilateral institutions through which we work, and this government is committed, and I'm very grateful for the support from the opposition, to bringing the Conference of Parties on Climate Change to London in 2020 in order to ensure that this country can build on the achievements which my right honourable friend, the member for Hastings and Rye, helped secure at Paris, and we can ensure that global leadership is something that Britain can show when it comes to the environment and climate change. And I'm very, very happy to give way to the right honourable gentleman.
My right honourable friend will know that he and I were on a different side in the referendum. But will he agree with me that it was deeply frustrating as an Environment Minister to have to sit in EU coordination meetings, lowering the standards, lowering the ambition of the United Kingdom government in order to have a single point? And so it is not a binary issue. Britain has a very ambitious international commitments, and I found myself constantly having to lower those in order to maintain one.
The right honourable gentleman knows absolutely how important it is to negotiate hard in every international forum, but he also knows, as a minister who was committed to the environment and who supported remaining in the European Union, that there are people who are strongly in favour of our membership of the European Union, who are committed environmentalists, but also people who welcomed our departure. I think nobody could say that the Member of Parliament for Richmond Park or Baroness Jones of Molescombe were in any way, anything other than sincere campaigners for environmental enhancement. Both of them felt, and I think it is completely open to debate, that we could achieve those goals as effectively, if not better, outside the European Union. I want to make a little bit of progress. I will take more interventions, but I just want to make clear Not only do I welcome the opportunity that this debate provides and the support provided by people across this House, I also want to make it clear that on this side of the House we recognise that the situation we face is an emergency. It is a crisis. It is a threat that all of us have to unite to meet. And actually the first person to make it clear, the first British politician, in fact the worst world politician, to make it clear that climate change was an emergency was Margaret Thatcher. A Conservative, a Christian who believed in the principle of stewardship, but above all, a scientist who followed the evidence. Margaret Thatcher at the United Nations, Michael Howard at Rio, the achievements of Amber Rudd at Paris. There has been a green thread of ambition running through Conservative governments, which is why it's important when we assess what needs to be done, we also take proper account of what has been done. We acknowledge our mistakes, but we also recognise achievements across party. And with that, I'm very happy to give way to the Honourable Lady.
I'm grateful to him for giving way, and his words are honeyed as ever, but we need action, not just words. Greta Thunberg last week was talking about the emergency and saying that we needed to see action as a result. Will he demonstrate his newfound conversion to this emergency by agreeing that the expansion of Heathrow Airport is quite simply incompatible with our climate change commitments? If it goes ahead, by 2050, aviation, if it's given a blank cheque, could be using up 2/5 of our total carbon budgets.
The Honourable Lady makes an important point. I mean, she talks about honeyed words. Well, one of the things, of course, this government has done is to make sure that honey can be produced in a more sustainable fashion by taking action as part of our pollinator strategy. And one of the things I'm very happy to see is more bees and other pollinators taking flight. That is something I'm happy with. I want to make a little bit more progress, and in particular, not quite yet. I want to thank the Honourable Member for Cheltenham for the speech that he gave yesterday, as was made reference to earlier in this debate. The Honourable Member for Cheltenham laid out the consequences. Laid out the consequences if we don't all collectively take action. And to be fair to the Leader of the Opposition, he did as well. The 5 warmest years, I won't give way at this stage, I will shortly. No. I mean no disrespect, but I must make progress, and I can't answer the previous question. I can't, and I don't know,
The Secretary of State is trying to make progress. Secretary of State.
Thank you very much. I will give way to colleagues on all sides of the House in a moment, but I must develop my argument. It is important that everything that this government has done and needs to do is properly analysed in this House. But as my honourable friend pointed out, 5 of the warmest years that this planet has ever endured have happened since 2010. The consequences for all of us are visible and have been recorded by members across this House. The fact that we have wildfires in the Arctic, the fact that the Ross Ice Shelf is reducing in size at a greater rate than anyone anticipated, the fact that glaciers are in retreat across Europe and in the Tibetan Plateau, all of these are evidence of the impact that climate change is having. And while statistics can sometimes be abstract and the impact can sometimes seem distant, we all know that as individual citizens and as parents, that the next generation will face the consequences if we do not take action now to deal with climate change. A warming world will result in the desertification of large parts of our Earth, and our Foreign Secretary is speaking today in the Sahel about the action that we are taking in order to deal with desertification. It will also lead, as one of the previous interventions pointed out, to population movement as desertification and the transformation of previously fertile lands into lands incapable of generating food mean that individuals are on the move. That will create for all of us a security challenge. And, as the Leader of the Opposition pointed out, this is not just a security challenge for the global north. It is also a moral and ethical challenge for all of us. And it's a moral and ethical challenge that we in the United Kingdom have to bear particularly heavily. We were the first country to industrialise. The Industrial Revolution forged here which generated prosperity here, has also been responsible for carbon emissions that have driven global warming, and even now it is those in the global south who are bearing that burden. That is why there is a responsibility on us to show leadership. That is why it is so vital that we reduce our emissions so that those in small island developing states who face the prospect of coastal erosion and damage to their economies and society are defended and protected. It is also why this government is committed to spending £5 billion every year as a contribution to helping developing nations deal with the prospect of climate change. I'm now very happy to give way, and I will first of all give way to my honourable friend.
I'd like to thank the Secretary of State and his ministerial team for its leadership on chalk streams. This country has 85% of the world's chalk streams. Many of those are in my constituency, and many of those are degraded. This is something the Secretary of State recognises, and please can I urge him to bring forward the Abingdon Reservoir plan as soon as possible.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. It's not just in chalk streams. As we also know, in the salmon rivers of Scotland, we are seeing a decline in biodiversity at a precipitate rate, and there are actions that need to be taken. We need to work with water companies, landowners and farmers in order to ensure that steps are taken to restore our rivers to health and to make sure that for recreational anglers and for all of us who believe in biodiversity, that appropriate steps are taken. In fairness, I must give way to the right honourable gentleman who's been seeking to intervene from the beginning.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State. 10 years ago, I helped form Cool Earth, which is brilliantly run by Matthew Owen. We are a tiny NGO. We protect more rainforests than any other NGO, whatever their size. When we go to DFID, they say we can't have any money because we ask for too little money. Will you put a rocket up DFID?
Secretary of State.
A rocket, I was going to say, a rocket might require too much fossil fuel in order to have the desired effect. But his point is a serious one. And we do work collectively across government. And I will be meeting on the morning of May the 7th with the Secretaries of State at Business, Department for International Development and the Foreign Office in order specifically to raise this issue. Now, I want to be fair to Scottish National Party colleagues, so I'm very happy to give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. The Secretary of State is signing up to the climate emergency talk slowly, but in my constituency there could be a major help to the UK's grid carbon footprint by the inclusion of a 600 megawatt interconnector to the mainland from the best wind resource in Europe. Yeah. Now, at the moment, Ofgem are talking about a 450 megawatt, but for 4 pence more than the average bill payer, we could do a lot for the carbon footprint. Will he stamp on Ofgem? And when they talk about concerns for the consumer, that they talk about the consumer's environment and not a tawdry 4 pence on bills.
Yeah. It's a very fair point, very effectively made. Ultimately, as he knows, it's a decision for the national grid. But one of the things that I would say that Scotland has contributed to, and Ofgem, forgive me, that one of the things that Scotland has contributed to, which we should all take account of, is this significant growth in renewables across the United Kingdom. Offshore wind and solar have grown over the course of the last 7 years. Yes, it's been a Conservative government or a coalition government some of the time in London that has led that, but the Scottish Government has played its part too, and I'm very happy in the same spirit to give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm grateful to the Secretary for allowing me to intervene on him. I want to take him back to the issue of security, if I might, because there are many teeth in the dangerous maw that is climate change, and security doesn't get enough attention. So can I ask him if the government will at some point, between his department and the Ministry of Defence and perhaps the FCO, bring forward an analysis as to how this affects the UK and what part the UK sees itself in playing as far as the security effects on climate change are concerned around the world?
It's a very fair point, and I will take that forward, and I will make sure that in advance of our preparations for COP26 at the end of 2020, that we make sure that the dimension of security, which I mentioned and which I know is very close to his heart, is there in our deliberations. Now, I must allow the Honourable Gentleman to give way, and then I'll allow the Honourable Lady, and then I'll make some progress.
I thank him very much for giving way. As part of any New Deal for nature, which has been much discussed and I hope will be discussed again today, does he agree with me that part of that should be a significant shift in the way DFID spends its money, so that we spend a much greater proportion of DFID on protecting and restoring the natural world, as a means also of preventing base poverty and alleviating poverty?
Yeah. I couldn't agree more, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for International Development, believes that as well. One of the best ways of safeguarding the environment is by supporting people towards sustainable growth. And projects like the Darwin Initiative have shown the way in making sure that we can both provide people with dignity and the chance to flourish economically, and also at the same time safeguard and enhance valuable habitats. And I'm very happy to give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Honourable the Secretary of State for giving way. He speaks with his characteristically warm words. However, that's not followed by action across this government. What we need to, while we're seeing subsidies cut from onshore wind and solar, VAT increased on solar, what we need to see is real action across every single government department and a responsibility on every single minister to cut carbon.
I absolutely agree that we need action, and let me also thank the Honourable Lady for her work. Before she joined us here in this House, she played a very distinguished role in Welsh politics in making sure that the environment was at the heart of the agenda in the Welsh Assembly Government. I've taken some interventions, I'll take some more, but I just want to make some points, in particular in response to the Honourable Lady's question, but she asked about action, and that is legitimate. Well, let me be clear. In the UK since 2010, we have decarbonised our economy faster than any other G20 nation. Between 2010 and 2018, we reduced greenhouse gas emissions in this country by 25%. UK CO2 emissions have fallen for 6 years in a row, which is the longest period on record. And the UK's renewable energy capacity has quadrupled since 2010. The proportion of UK electricity which comes from low-carbon sources has increased from 19% in 2010 to almost 53% in 2018. That meant that 2018 was a record year for renewable energy. And over the last year, we generated record levels of solar and offshore wind energy. Annual support from the government for renewables will be over £10 billion by 2021. And all of this has come as a direct result of a shared ambition between a government that sets stretching targets, is prepared to intervene where necessary, but also recognises that we need the ingenuity and enterprise of the private sector working in partnership with government in order to deliver change. And I should stress, safeguarding our environment must not come at the cost of ending economic growth. Because economic growth is vital to spur the innovation, to secure the investment, in order to make sure that we have the technological breakthroughs that can safeguard our environment. Since 1990, we have seen a 40% reduction overall in greenhouse gas emissions, and that was across different parties. We also saw an increase in growth of 2/3. And in particular, if we think about the significant growth in renewables, think also about solar energy. Of course it needed subsidy initially in order to kick-start. But as solar energy costs have diminished, so the need for subsidy over time, as any economist would tell you, is lesser. Originally, when we came to power, and this is no criticism of any previous government, only 38.3 megawatts of power was generated by solar electricity in this country. It is now 13,000 megawatts. 13 gigawatts. That is a 99% increase in solar power generation under Conservative ministers. Now, is there more to do? I won't deny that there is more to do. Should we be more ambitious? We have to be more ambitious. But the story that is sometimes told of the last 9 years as 9 years when we allowed the grass to grow under our feet. No, what we allowed were 1,000 flowers to flourish in order to ensure that our environment was safeguarded. I'm very happy to give way.
I'm sorry to make a Thatcherite point. I know it doesn't go down very well nowadays. But will he confirm that the best way to reduce emissions is to have a vigorous free enterprise, a low-tax, deregulated economy, and the country with the worst record are socialist command economies, particularly in Eastern Europe?
Well, my right honourable friend makes a very good point. It is no coincidence that it was Margaret Thatcher, a scientist and a free marketeer, who was the first to raise the alarm on climate change. And it is also no coincidence that if we look at the record of environmental devastation in the Eastern Bloc when we had command and control economies, it shamed the world. And if we look now, and this is not a party political point, but merely an observation, if we look at the command and control economy in Venezuela, it has not just beggared its own people and made profligate use of hydrocarbons in a way that has led to environmental degradation. It is also the case in Venezuela, where socialism has trumped the environment as a cause. It is also the case in Venezuela that their contribution to animal welfare has been having to open their zoo to allow people to eat the wild animals there. The truth is that the fundamentalist socialism that we've seen in Venezuela, and also the heedless selfishness that some other political leaders in other parts of the world exhibit, are twin dangers. And we need to face them down. So whether it's Bolsonaro in Brazil or Maduro in Venezuela, we need to say to those people who do not put their people and their environment first, we're on your case. Free markets, free individuals, and an earth free of pollution are what people deserve. Now, yes.
I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. Earlier on, he made reference to the wonderful work that the UK is doing in this area, and he's just mentioned other countries. Would he kindly inform the House a little bit about what pressure we are putting on other countries to play their part, because this really is something that has to be a global effort?
Well, I'm hoping that I might have the opportunity to, over dinner perhaps with the President of the United States when he comes here, make it clear to him... I'll probably opt for a meat-free option on that evening. But I want to make it clear to him that as the world's biggest polluter, he has to take responsibility. And when it comes to the environment, I am ideologically colourblind. Whether people come from blue states or red states, whether they come from blue parties or red parties, the key question is, are you acting? And if you are, I will applaud, and I'm happy to give way.
Very grateful to him for giving way to the Yellow Party. He's spoken at length about his environmental credentials and what this government is doing on the environment. Can you tell me why the government is not supporting my Nappy's Environmental Standards Bill?
I have had the opportunity to meet the Honourable Gentleman to discuss his Nappy's Environmental Standards Bill, and one of the things that we are looking at is whether or not we can use the Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme to cover the initiative that he raises. I'm very grateful to him for raising it. I think it is the case that his legislation draws attention to a defect, but I'm not sure that his legislation is absolutely quite right, but I'm very happy to work with him in order to bring that about. Now, I want to give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. He talked about flowers, he's talked about honey. Would he agree that whilst we could talk a good game in Parliament, the parliamentary estate is an appalling environment for our pollinators? So through him, could I invite every MP here to join me in 2 weeks' time to the APPG for bees and pollinators, where we're going to see a mock-up which would turn Cromwell Green into a wildflower meadow, host a beehive which MPs here could manage, and do more than just talk?
I absolutely, and of course we at DEFRA have a beehive on our roof, but everyone can play their part. I'm happy to give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. He's been making points about leadership at international and national level, but we can all do more and local councils can do more. My right honourable friend will be aware that Conservative councils recycle or reduce the waste, or more than twice as much of the waste as do Labour councils. But will he congratulate in particular North Kesteven District Council in my constituency, which has in the last 10 years reduced its carbon footprint by almost 70%?
Well, my honourable friend makes a very good point, and I'm very happy. I won't give way for another few minutes to North Kesteven District Council for their exemplary leadership. And, of course, at local government level across the country, there are leaders from all parties.
Order! I can't hear the Secretary of State, although he's speaking quite audibly, because there's so much noise going on. I thought people wanted to hear his answers to their questions. Secretary of State.
I'm very grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will give way again, but not for a few moments. And I just wanted to place on record thanks to everyone in local government who contributes to improving recycling. There is much more that we need to do, which is why in the forthcoming Environment Bill we will be putting into effect some of the changes that our Waste and Resources Strategy talks about in order to ensure that we have uniform levels of recycling across the country, and we extend the Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme. But it is a fact that overall, pound for pound, kilo for kilo, Conservative councils have a better record in recycling than Labour councils. But I'm more than happy to acknowledge, I'm more than happy to acknowledge that there are individual Labour councillors that do well and from whom we can learn. Now, I said that we need to do more as a nation, and that is why I'm looking forward to tomorrow to the report of the Committee on Climate Change. Originally established by the Right Honourable Member for Doncaster North, the programme of carbon budgets that it has set has enabled us to make significant progress so far in meeting our obligations to the Earth. But we all know, we all know that we need to do more. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change last October made it clear that the Paris target of 2% Celsius temperature rise was one which was, as the science showed, not ambitious enough, and that we need to ensure that we slow the rate of greenhouse gas emissions and hopefully achieve net zero in greenhouse gas emissions, just one second, by 2050. And we immediately, my right honourable friend, immediately commissioned the Climate Change Committee after the IPCC report to tell us what we as a government and we as a society should do in order to meet that target. And it was the case that that level of ambition has been endorsed by a range of different organisations, from the NFU that say that we should try to have net zero in agriculture by 2040, to companies like Tesco, our biggest single retailer, that have also committed to the net zero target. Which is why I'm delighted that today the Leader of the Opposition has also joined this government, the NFU and Tesco in committing to net zero by 2050. As they say, every little helps. I won't give way for a second. Now, because one of the things that I want to emphasise is that actions count, a higher level of ambitions count, but it is also the case that when people across this House say that this situation is an emergency, we need to look at the record. I'm very happy for our record to be looked at. I'm very happy for criticisms to be made. But since I became Environment Secretary nearly 2 years ago, the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, has not used a single opposition day to debate climate change or the environment until today. He has not asked a single question, not one, to the Prime Minister about climate change or the environment, despite more than 400 opportunities to do so. And when climate change protesters went to his own home in order to literally bring home the scale of the challenge that we faced, he wasn't able to stop and talk to them on that occasion. The point I would make is not to doubt the sincerity of the Right Honourable Gentleman, but the point that I want to make is that if we believe that this is an emergency, as one of my colleagues pointed out earlier, let's not try to say that any one party in this House has a monopoly of virtue. Let's try to ensure that we have a civilised debate that combines a sense of urgency about the challenge in front of us and a determination to take action in the future.
Order! Order! Really, it's like a primary school class. There's no... I'm sorry, I mean no insult to primary school children. Was the Secretary of State taking an intervention? We're a hob house.
I thank him for giving way. Since we're talking about cross-party consensus, but also that things are moving very fast in this debate. Whatever has been said about fracking in the past, it's not a transition fuel, it's a fossil fuel. And we should stop any new investment in any new technology that is a fossil fuel technology. We must stop it. Will his government finally commit to stop his support into fracking?
I completely understand where the Honourable Lady is coming from, but one thing that we all have to acknowledge is that as we strive to meet more ambitious targets for emissions, that hydrocarbons will be part of that mix. Now, to be fair to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, he has acknowledged that coal, high-quality coal, can be part of the mix when it comes to, specifically, for example, steel production. It is a legitimate argument across this House about the pace at which we should reduce our reliance on coal. And no government has gone faster to reduce our reliance on coal, the single most polluting hydrocarbon, than this government. Now, when it comes to other hydrocarbons in the mix, we know, I'm sorry, we've been told that we should listen to the science, we know that gas is a less polluting hydrocarbon. If we can move from coal to gas, then overall we reduce the level of pollution. Now, ultimately what we want to do is to move as fast as possible to incentivising and generating more of our energy from renewables, which is what we've done. But the key thing, I'm not giving way. The key thing that everyone has to recognise across this House, and to be fair to the Right Honourable Gentleman to leave the Opposition, he has, If we want to make progress and we want to have a higher level of ambition, we need to be realistic about what those trade-offs are, and we need to ensure that where appropriate, gas can be part of the energy mix, a diminishing part, but it will be part for the foreseeable future. I'm not giving way at the moment. It is also important, as the Right Honourable Gentleman pointed out, not just that we take action on energy and that we decarbonise our economy and that we recognise the global challenge that climate change presents, but that we also do everything we can in our own country to adapt and to mitigate the effects of climate change. That is why this government is committed to the planting of 11 million new trees. That's why the Countryside Stewardship and Woodland Carbon Fund have been created, in order to ensure that we reforest this country, which is the Right Honourable Gentleman fairly pointed out is one of the least forested in Europe. But we are lucky in that... I won't give way at this stage. We are also lucky in this country, though, that we have blanket bog and peatland, one of the most effective carbon stores in the world. We have a concentration of it, and this government is committed to restoring more than 6,000 hectares of peatland to a state where they can play their role in acting as a carbon sink. All of these steps are part of the 25-year environment plan, which is intended to ensure that for the first time we hand on to the next generation a restored environment. More trees planted, more habitats restored to good or better status, more investment in clean air and water, and above all, more investment in making sure that the organic content of our soil is improved, a critical measure, not just in improving fertility for future food production, but also dealing with carbon.
The Secretary of State gave way. I know he couldn't avoid it on the subject of soil. And would Secretary of State, it saddens me, Secretary of State, and I agree with what was being said earlier, that this is being made into some kind of political football, because it's not all been words. And what my honourable friend has demonstrated is that it's about the policies. We have to get the policies right to be the game changer. And one of our game-changing policies is our clean growth strategy. Would he agree that that is the direction we have to go in to really change minds and industry?
Well, there are a few people who are more passionate about the environment than my honourable friend, and she's absolutely right that the clean growth strategy shows, as we discussed earlier, how you can combine the decarbonisation of our economy with the creation of new jobs. There are hundreds of thousands of jobs in our country that are part of clean energy generation and carbon capture, and that is the way to go. Now, I do want to take a number of interventions. I do want to, with your permission, Madam Speaker, a number of interventions in order to ensure that people across the House can make their points. And then, having taken those interventions, I shan't take any more, because this debate is heavily oversubscribed, and I want everyone to have the chance, if I don't take their intervention, to speak. So, on that basis, and I will seek to be quick, first of all, Honourable Gentleman.
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. He's mentioned several times the importance of handing on to future generations. To that end, is he as impressed as I am when we go around schools in our constituency at the level of concern and awareness about environmental issues and climate change? And can we praise all of those who've helped educate our young children to be aware of these issues, including some TV programme makers who also play their part in educating our young people?
I absolutely agree. I think the role of many broadcasters, not least the BBC, has been inspirational, but I also enjoyed the opportunity to visit Titherington School in Macclesfield, in my honourable friend's constituency, just on Friday, where an incredibly impressive group of Year 8 and Year 9 children in Titherington Grows Green showed how they're combining enterprise by operating their own new company and making sure that recycling and renewables are at the heart of economic growth. Happy to give way to, yes, the Honourable Lady.
I'm very grateful. Thank you for giving way. He spoke earlier about leadership. So would he celebrate with me the Labour Council of Kirklees, who have already, in January, declared a climate change emergency? And would he agree we have so much consensus? Why can't we just declare it today and all go back to our constituencies and start campaigning? Because we cannot be on the wrong side of history in this regard.
Well, I agree with the Honourable Lady that a high level of ambition on the part of local government is absolutely right. But the key question is not, do you declare an emergency? That is only one part of it. It is, do you act? It is actions, not words, that count. And throughout this debate, and I applaud the Right Honourable Gentleman, as I mentioned earlier, for calling it, throughout this debate we've heard again and again and again about the series of actions being undertaken by this government and the series of actions that we intend to undertake that show how seriously we are taking it. And I think that is the real test.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I know, like me, he'll be celebrating Staffordshire Day today, and will praise the work of the Staffordshire Wildlife Trust in what it does to protect our environment. But on actions, can I draw the Secretary of State's attention to the fact that we have just gone through the longest period of coal-free electricity production since the Industrial Revolution? Those are actions by this government.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It happened this Easter weekend, and also the beautiful Staffordshire moorlands contain some of the peatland and heathland, which is such a valuable resource in so many ways. I won't give way to everyone. I will give way to a few more. Then I will make progress. I have to give way to the Right Honourable Lady.
Can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and I certainly welcome the change in his party's policy on the forest, which, of course, let's not forget, they planned to sell back in 2011. Does he share my concerns that the country is currently set to miss its fourth and fifth carbon budgets? And does he agree with me that the next spending review that is going to be conducted by the Treasury has to set out how not just the economy but the entire government purchasing processes and policies have to achieve net zero? It should be a net zero spending review.
Makes sense to me. Yes.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. As we produce a new agriculture environment policy, we can actually plant a lot of trees along banks, we can actually mitigate against flooding and improve our environment and have great food at the same time. I think I very much welcome the policies that the Secretary of State bringing forward.
Secretary of State.
Well, he's absolutely right. One of the things that we have to recognise is the vital role that farmers and growers play, not just in providing us with food, but also in making sure that our countryside is beautiful, but also that we are fighting climate change. And in particular, I want to say thank you to Minette Batters, the leader of the NFU, who's committed the NFU to having net zero agriculture by 2040. She's a fantastic champion, not only for British food, but also for our environment. And I'm happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
Home energy conservation is going to be absolutely vital if we're to achieve these goals. In many of the poorest households in the land, unfortunately, they live in homes which are very difficult to insulate under traditional means. Isn't it time we introduced a new scheme that makes it possible for people like my constituents to do their bit?
I absolutely take the honourable gentleman's point. We must make sure that new construction meets high standards, not just in carbon emissions, but also in the provision of domestic heat. But you're also right as well that we need to look at retrofitting existing housing, particularly in some of the poorer areas of the country, particularly in areas like the honourable gentleman's, where the case is most pressing. Yes.
I'm very grateful. Will the Secretary of State join me in praising the Woodland Trust for the work that they're doing on the 50 million tree proposed national forest, and the work of the Forestry Commission, who have their commercial... They grow all the trees for the Forestry Commission in my constituency.
I'm hugely grateful. Not just the National Forest, which is taken former industrial areas in Derbyshire, Staffordshire and Leicestershire and render them even more beautiful, but it's also the case that in Cheshire and in the areas of the Northern Forest that we are planning to develop from Liverpool to Hull, the role of the Woodland Trust has been absolutely inspirational. I also have to say, while they don't always get everything right, the work of the Forestry Commission in Northumberland and Cumbria is one that I'm more than happy to endorse and celebrate. I think I can only really give way now, a couple more times, to the Honourable Lady, and then I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm most grateful to the Secretary of State. He mentioned peatlands. 80% of our peatlands are damaged. It accounts for 10% of our carbon dioxide emissions. So could he explain why the government is only putting £6 million a year into peatland restoration?
It's actually 10 million.
May I thank the Secretary of State for giving way? May I also ask him to work more closely with his partner who's currently in the Sahel, as he spoke about the regional aspects of this, because we have areas of land, such as Vietnam, which has only got paddy fields only about a metre above sea level. And what we're talking about here is the possibility of salination of agricultural areas and consequent massive population movements caused by climate change. I very much welcome the efforts he's making domestically, but could he tell me how much he's doing with the embassy network around the world?
Well, it is the case that all posts recognise I won't take any more interventions. All posts recognise the vital role that the UK has to play in making sure that we deal with environmental and climate change challenges. And whether that is making sure, for example, that we halt deforestation in Indonesia, or whether it's making sure, whether in Vietnam or in Bangladesh, that we deal effectively with the challenges of climate change. We deploy our international development money and our overseas development assistance with exactly that goal. Is there more that we can do in the future? Absolutely. But as the Honourable Gentleman pointed out, and as the Foreign Secretary is making clear today in the Sahel, this is an area where our moral responsibility to the world's poorest, our own interest in global security and our debt to the next generation coincide. I want to conclude simply by saying this. There will be an opportunity in the Environment Bill that we intend to bring before the House shortly. The first Environment Bill for many years, a flagship measure. There will be an opportunity for people across this House to work together in order to ensure that we have the highest standards of environmental protection. I've been grateful for the work undertaken by the Chairman of the EFRA Select Committee and the Chairman of the Environmental Audit Committee in making sure that that bill improves. I've never seen a bill come to this House that hasn't benefited from scrutiny and improvement and enhancement along the way. And the way in which that bill, I believe, will mark a step change in how this country tackles the twin challenges of climate change and our broader ecological degradation is a test for all of us. Will we approach that bill in a spirit of constructive but determined energy? Will we use that legislation in order to say that all of us worked together, as we worked together across parties in 2008 when the Climate Change Act was introduced, to demonstrate that in Britain, the country that was responsible for the first industrial revolution, that we are powering a new green revolution? Yeah. The responsibility rests on all of us to be honest and gracious about the achievements of other parties, as I was earlier about the Welsh Assembly and the Scottish Environment Minister. But it is also incumbent on all of us to recognise that if we really believe that we face an emergency and a crisis, that we should do as our forefathers did when there were emergencies and crises that this country faced in 1914 and in 1940. We put aside partisanship, we recognised the sincerity on the other side, we acknowledged that both sides had made mistakes, but we had a shared ambition to prove that Britain can lead. We've led in the past in defence of freedom. Let's lead now in defence of our planet. Thank you.
I think it only fair to warn